Hey everybody, it's Raidhyn and welcome to a very special Brawlhalla video where I'm going to be talking about advanced tips, tricks, and strategy for 1v1 competitive matches. Now originally I wanted to make a full video with all sorts of examples of the concepts I'm going to be talking about, but I decided that would take me way too much time with the level of quality I wanted it to be at, so instead I'm just going to talk through a bunch of concepts that you can use for your 1v1 matches. Now I'm setting this discussion to a best of 5 match that I did with Misfit, who's one of the better Brawlhalla players that I've met so far. So you can be seeing some of the action, but you can also choose to just listen to this audio only if you want to run this on your cell phone or whatever on your way to work. But anyhow, let's go ahead and get started. One of the first things I want to talk about is to know your dodge options and mechanics. Basically, dodging is one of the key forms of defense in Brawlhalla. I mean, a good offense is a good defense in this game, but dodging is the only real thing that you have to avoid damage. There's no blocking, there's none of that kind of stuff. So knowing how and when to dodge is really important. Now, I did make a really detailed video about dodging that I will link in the description of this, but I will talk about it briefly here. Basically, some of the important things to know are that you can dodge in all 4 directions, so not just forward and backwards, but also up and down. And if you dodge downward while standing on a platform, you'll gain invulnerability frames while standing in place. And this is really useful because it allows you to kind of further mess with your positioning and catch your opponent off guard. Additionally, one of the important things to know about dodging is the cooldown time. There's basically 1.5 seconds of cooldown between each dodge when you're on the ground, and in the air the cooldown for dodges is about 3 seconds. So just kind of understanding how often and how frequently you can dodge is kind of important. Originally, when I first started playing Brawlhalla, I didn't realize that the dodge had a cooldown. I thought it was related to being hit or attacking in between, but it is actually just a straight cooldown. With nothing else affecting it. So it's important to be aware of. Now, as far as how often to dodge, that kind of depends on your play style. Now, some people that I play against have the propensity where they basically have this pattern of attack, dodge, and they play very defensively. And kind of understanding when your opponent dodges, whether they dodge when approaching you or when trying to predict when you're going to attack them, is kind of important because eventually, at the beginning, when you're playing against people, you want to dodge to avoid attacks, and then later you want to be able to bait out your opponent's dodge. It's one of the bigger parts of the mind games in Brawlhalla, which we'll be talking about later, but in 1v1, basically practicing when and how to dodge can be incredibly important. So the next thing I want to talk about is how important it is to know your weapon's entire tool set. Now in 1v1 matches, there is not nearly as much room for heavy attacks the way that there are in standard 4v4 matches. You're going to be wanting to rely a lot more on light attacks, and you're going to want to know what some of the basic combinations are for each of your weapons. For example, down light is an incredibly useful move for most weapons and usually carries a large amount of defense or combo options afterwards. In fact, the down light move for the sword has pretty much the only hit confirm I've been able to find in the game. And just being able to add that one move to my repertoire instead of just spamming tilt attacks or trying to land heavies has made fighting a lot more effective. You also want to know all of the signature moves and how to properly use them with each of your characters, because not only do they do a lot of damage, but often the timing on them is so different that you can use them to punish dodges or other types of approaches. But basically, the important thing that I'm trying to emphasize here is that you want to know all of the options available to you. Just going into battle, trying to figure it out as you go along is not going to do you very well. You want to know every capability you have available to you. So, if you have a favorite character and spears and swords or lances and guns are your thing, spend a little bit of time in training and make sure that you learn the entire moveset, because it will pay off in the long run. You will have more options available to you, and it will help you win matches. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is edge guarding and chasing. So edge guarding is basically a term for this type of arena brawler. It's very commonly used in Smash Brothers, and basically what it means is you're guarding the edge of the arena to prevent the other person from getting back up. Every character has their own options for doing this, but it's an important technique to work on and discover your options for, because you know, if you've smashed someone off of the arena, you have a huge advantage at that point, and you want to be able to do as much damage as possible and hopefully, you know, lead to an actual knockout. So edge guarding is very important. Now, chasing is a whole another element, and what I mean by that is basically when you go off the edge of the arena, when you're not guarding the edge anymore, but you're actively trying to do damage to the opponent in the air. Now, there are a couple basic variations of this. One is to do tilt attacks in the air and try to knock them out if they've already used their dodge. The other one is to use downward heavy attacks to try to knock them downward instead of off to the side. It's kind of an extension of edge guarding, but it is also something that deserves its own set of practice, because you basically want to use edge guarding and chasing to maintain your advantage. If you've knocked someone off the arena, they're suddenly on the back foot. They have very limited attacking options and are often going to have to do some very interesting types of maneuvers to get back to the safety of the arena. So edge guarding and chasing is definitely something you want to be thinking about and trying to implement into your game. The next thing I want to talk about is how important it is to learn unarmed combat. In 1v1 matches, a very, very common tactic is to eliminate the opponent's ability to pick up weapons. So if you're on opposite ends of the screen and somebody is weaponless, you're going to pick up all the extra weapons that have fallen to the ground to prevent them from picking up a weapon. So you're always at somewhat of a disadvantage when you're unarmed, but it doesn't mean that you're entirely optionless. Some of the unarmed attacks have really good priority. The down light slide attack has good movement and can combo into a standing heavy attack afterwards. And additionally, the down tilt attack when in the air, it looks like a little dive kick, has a huge amount of priority. It beats out a lot of different things. But you want to be able to get basically comfortable with unarmed combat the same way that you get comfortable with your weapons, because a lot of times in 1v1 matches you're going to find yourself unarmed, and you want to make sure that you can surprise your opponent and catch them off guard by being able to attack effectively without a weapon. So the next thing I want to talk about is how important it is to be able to use the gadgets that are on the ground. Currently at beta build 1.1, there are only 3 different types of gadgets. One is the spiked ball, one is the landmine, one is the bomb, and then if you want to count it, the Valkyria horn that calls your Valkyr to drop off a weapon for you. Now, learning to use all of these is very important. So let's talk about the mace ball real quick. The spiked ball you can basically use to do repeated damage to people in a close area, and if you charge it up, you can also knock people out with red health out of the screen, which is very useful. It's much better than being unarmed, and if you get more proficient with throwing them, you can do some scary damage with it and basically help fend off an attacker until you're able to pick up your own weapon. Now, just to clarify here, being able to throw things, you can throw in all of the 8 directions. So by that I mean up, down, left, right, and then also all of the diagonals. This is important to know because if you're playing on a pad like I do, it's easy to think that you can throw in all 360 direction, but it's not the case. And actually, once you realize that you're limited to cardinal and diagonal directions, it's actually a bit easier to aim. And you can also charge up the throw for each of these as well, which is pretty important when you're using the spike ball for increased damage and potential knockouts. Now, the bomb probably does the most damage, and a lot of times picking up a bomb can be scarier if you're good with throws than simply going for a weapon, because hitting somebody with that is going to do a huge amount of damage. If they're at white health, it'll put them instantly at yellow. If they're at yellow health, it'll put them at orange. And if they're at orange, it has the potential to knock them out, if not at least put them to red health. So the bombs are very useful. Now, people who are familiar with having bombs tossed at their face will be trying to dodge, And so the best thing for you with a bomb to do is to try to put them on the defensive and wait until you know you have a guaranteed hit after they've wasted their dodge and you can predict their movement. Now, this is a lot easier said than done, but it's certainly worth practicing, and you can set gadgets in training mode. So I would strongly suggest you work on that and try to add that to your gameplay. Now, the landmine has very similar damage capabilities to the bomb, but what's interesting about the landmine is that you can kind of use it to force your opponent to advance in certain directions or avoid an area of the map entirely. There are also some setups you can use for it, and you basically want to make sure that you're never between your opponent and a landmine, because many of the attacks in Brawlhalla cause knockback, and I've been in more than one instance in a 1v1 match where someone has, hit me with a light attack and sent me backwards flying into a bomb, and it just hasn't worked out very well. So there are a couple different ways to utilize the landmines, and just kind of think of it too as kind of a area of effect control. Just because people are going to be having to hop over it or jump around it, and a lot of times you can punish people when forcing them to attack in the vicinity of one of the landmines. The last thing is the Valkyria horn. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is that it does cause damage when it hits, and on characters with lighter amounts of armor like Hattori and Ada, you can actually knock somebody out of the ring with this if you hit them with the horn. One of the main things that I try to do when using them is to make sure that I'm calling them in an area that's horizontal with the platforms or where I think my opponent is going to be. So if I want him to move off of a platform, I can use the Valkyria horn and at least force him to dodge around it and sometimes punish afterwards. I always try to do this because it just provides double use. You get a weapon out of it, and you also get to have some attack potential. Now, one of the other interesting things too about picking up weapons is that you can call the Valkyria and pick up your weapon in mid-air. You can also do it while clinging to the side of the arena. So, like in this case, we're looking at part of the match here on Brawlhaven. If I was to climb down the side of one of these walls and call the Valkyria, not only would it help me get back up on the edge afterwards, but I could pick up my weapon while still clinging to the edge. So that's kind of the comprehensive coverage of gadgets. And the main thing is not to dismiss them. It's kind of easy to ignore these when you first start playing because you're focused on learning your weapons. But you want to make sure that you're using every advantage that's given to you, and being able to properly use the gadgets on the screen is very important. All right, kind of related, let's talk about throwing your weapon for offense and defense. So every weapon, when thrown, basically has a hitbox roughly drawn in like a square or rectangle around the drawn representation of the weapon. So basically what this means is that guns and blades have a very tiny hitbox in comparison to hammers and spears, which are much larger when thrown. Now, some of the more interesting uses that I've seen for this is if you've been knocked up in the air and somebody is trying to chase you with a upward heavy attack, you can actually throw your weapon straight down and interrupt their attack, pick it up again afterwards, and then continue. You can also use it in certain situations. This takes a little bit more practice, but you can use it in certain situations against edge guarding, where if you get horizontal with the edge and someone's trying to edge guard, you can actually throw your weapon at them and then follow up with an attack afterwards. Now, throwing your weapon for offense and defense like this comes with its own risk, because obviously if you lose your weapon, you're going to be at a disadvantage again until you can pick another one up. But usually this catches people off guard, largely because it's one of the last techniques for people to learn in Brawlhalla as far as regular 1v1 matches go, but also because it messes with the typical rhythm of the game. Most of the time, people are going to be used to dodging against basic attacks and movement, and throwing a weapon, even at incredibly close range, is a really good way to get in some free damage and catch people off guard. Now, if you are on the same platform and you throw your weapon at someone, if it hits them, it will bounce back and remain active for about a second or so. So if it does connect, most of the time you can't actually follow up just by picking it up again and continuing your attack. So this has been something that's been instrumental in how I'm winning games lately. And it's something that when I'm playing against slightly newer players who haven't had as much 1v1 matchup, it's something that frustrates them to no end because they just don't expect it. If you're playing 1v1, you want to be able to know how to do this effectively. Throwing your weapon for offense and defense is something that has really elevated kind of the mind games and my capabilities in these 1v1 matches. So go practice it, go knock it out, and then go back and win some matches. All right, so the next topic is a little bit more psychological than anything else. Let's talk about style real quick. Whether you realize it or not, everybody has a style. And everybody has kind of a pattern of what they rely on consistently to attack and defend, and how they approach, how they run away from you, how they edge guard. You know, everybody has their favorite techniques for how they play the game. The way that I normally win most of my matches is I figure out what the other person's pattern is before they realize that I've adapted to them. And this ends up being hugely important for me because I don't really win these games with my skills as a player as much as I do with my brain. So normally I'm trying to outthink people more so than outplay them. And this is really important because if you can recognize your opponent's pattern and respond to it accordingly, you're going to be in an advantage. Now, this concept works both ways. When you realize that the other player has started to adapt to your methods, you need to be able to adapt and start changing yours again. Basically, what you want to do is avoid getting predictable. The more predictable you are, the easier it's going to be for your opponent to respond to everything with the appropriate moves. Like here, like in this match over the last in the last 2 minutes or so, I've been throwing weapons constantly at Hattori, and she's dodged pretty much every single one of them because she's gotten so used to the fact that I'm going to throw weapons that she's saving her dodge for the weapon toss. It's just, you know, I became kind of predictable with it. So in order to win, I'm going to have to change up my strategy. Or not my strategy, but, you know, this tactic I've been using of tossing weapons at people. I know this is kind of a fuzzier concept to understand, but the main thing you want to do is just try to figure out your opponent's pattern and punish it, and try to make sure that your own pattern isn't being recognized. And if it is, you know, if you're starting to lose, it's probably because you've become predictable. Change it up. Start mixing it up. Start using different attacks. If you play aggressively, start playing more defensively. If you play very defensively, start playing aggressively. If your pattern is dodge, attack, then mix it up and put 3 attacks in there before you dodge, or start dodging only on reaction. You know, just mix it up. That's kind of the important thing to think about here. Now, this is something that's true across all fighting games, so people who are coming into Brawlhalla from Smash Brothers or Street Fighter or Injustice or any other type of fighting game will kind of be familiar with this. If you're not as comfortable with this concept, it's something that you'll see a lot in higher levels of play, where the mind games of prediction and adaptation all kind of come in. So, that being said, let's talk a little bit about timing. This kind of plays into it as well, but one of the things to think about is your timing with your attacks is kind of interesting because a lot of times the difference between hitting and hitting an opponent and not hitting an opponent is a split second. So dodges, for example, last about a second or so, and some of the attacks in the game have about a second or so of active frames, which is basically the amount of time that move will deal damage. So if you wait just a split second, you can hit with an attack that would otherwise normally miss. And the reason why this is important is because sometimes you don't need a big change in plans to actually start having effective attacks. You only need a slight shift in timing to be able to start punishing dodges and other things. So think about your timing when you're playing and try to think about options where if you do something a split second sooner or a split second later, if that will affect the outcome of the attack. Alright, let's talk a little bit about maintaining an advantage. The way that it seems most 1v1 matches have been set up is that you're playing on lives instead of time. Most of the 1v1 games that I've played, we've done 5 lives in a 10-minute arena. So what this basically means is that if you knock the person out first and you're still on orange health, you essentially have 1/3 of a health bar of advantage. And the idea is that you want to try to maintain that advantage for as much as possible. In this situation right now on the video, Hattori has 2 lives and Ada has 1. And this basically means that I, as Ada, have to play very safely and very defensively if I'm going to knock Hattori out and still have enough of a life bar to actually make a difference afterwards. Now, the reason I say this is because no matter how good of a player you are, you're always going to make a mistake, or you're going to get hit by something, lag is going to do you in, whatever it is, it's going to happen. And so when you're at red health, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to get knocked out. So the idea is that you want to maintain a health advantage, and instead of making big risky plays, once you have a lead, you basically want to force your opponent into being overly aggressive to try and make up for the lead that he's lost. If you can start forcing your opponent into making mistakes or being overly aggressive or making poor choices because they're behind, you can often end up in a situation where your lead has become so wide by 1 life or 2 lives that you've essentially won the match halfway through. So when you have an advantage, try to maintain it as much as possible. Alright, so we kind of talked about predicting, baiting, and mind games a little bit in the adapting your style section, but I just want to reiterate it a little bit more because it's something that becomes more prevalent the more you play and the more often you play the same opponent. So, when you first start playing, you're going to make basic predictions on how people are going to play. You're going to expect them to attack you when they get close. You're going to expect them to dodge when they get scared. But over the first couple of minutes, you're going to start understanding how a player's style works, and you're going to start adapting to that. Well, basically, once you figured out what they like to do, that's when you can start baiting them. There are very, very few safe moves in Brawlhalla. Almost everything is punishable, especially heavy attacks. So if you know that somebody really likes using heavy attacks, those things are really easy to bait. Downward heavy moves from the air are really easy to bait and also very easy to avoid once you're on the ground. I've baited people into trying to downward smash attack me on while they're chasing me off the arena, and then turned it into being able to dodge around them and return the favor by knocking them out. There's a lot of possibilities so long as you have a plan and you feel like you can anticipate what they're going to do. The idea is, you want to try to bait them into making mistakes. Now, as far as the mind games go, it's something that's really common to all fighting games. But basically what you want to do is make sure that you stay in control. If messing with your opponent's head is something that becomes more prevalent the more you've played the same character, or the later on you are in a tournament, or even any kind of psychological advantage you might have through reputation or anything like that. So being able to get inside of the other player's head is always going to be an advantage. And you just kind of do this by being unpredictable and trying to control the flow of the match. Now, it's not something that I can clearly outline by showing you a video example or trying to talk through this more descriptively. There have been many great guides and other things written on the subject, but it is something that is present in pretty much any 1v1 multiplayer game and something you should think about when playing Brawlhalla. Alright, so the last two are slightly different. One of the important things about 1v1 and even just gaming in general is take breaks. 1v1 takes a lot of mental thinking and a lot of stress compared to the normal fun 4v4 matches, or free-for-all matches rather. There's a lot of thinking involved. There's a whole lot more frustration in certain times when you feel like you're playing, more poorly than you should be, or when you just can't figure out how to defeat somebody. If you're starting to feel frustrated, take a break. In the fighting game community, they call it going on tilt when you start getting so angry that you're just not playing well anymore. And the last thing that you want to do is go on tilt, because it's going to affect your entire game. You want to be able to play as calm and confidently as possible. And so if this means not playing Brawlhalla for a few days or a few hours or whatever it takes for you to kind of step away from it and reset, then do that. Take a break. It's gonna, let some of the new things that you've experienced and learned in your matches kind of incubate for a little while and then come back to it. My improvements at this game have always come over the course of days, not minutes. I feel that this kind of applies to pretty much any game that you play, where whatever information that you've learned, it takes a while for that to incubate and set in your mind. So don't feel bad about having to take a break. Don't feel like you always have to be training or playing constantly. And especially if you get frustrated, just put the controller down for a little while, take a break, and come back to it. And this ties into the last tip, which is, have fun. Like, it's a game. If you're not having fun playing 1v1, then don't. If you're playing with friends and you're suddenly realizing that you're hating on your buddies because they're winning and you're not, or because suddenly you've turned into the asshole and you're bragging about winning and everything else when your friends aren't having any fun anymore, then maybe it's time to rethink your reasons for playing what you're playing. If you're not having fun, you're losing out on half of the enjoyment of all of this. And on top of that, I feel that everybody's game suffers when they're not truly having fun. Part of the reason why I've been able to improve so rapidly at 1v1s is because I ran into a few players who have an incredible amount of passion for the game, but also a ridiculously positive attitude. Everybody is really encouraging. Everybody is very, there's lots of laughs and smiles, and there's constant encouragement for each other to get better and, choose new characters and learn new things. And it's the fun element that has kept me playing this and has kept me trying to improve. Not because I want to get, become the best player ever, because I want to get to the top of the leaderboards that don't even exist yet, but because I'm honestly having fun playing with these people. So I'm going to go ahead and talk over this last match, because that covers pretty much all of the things I wanted to talk about. So this is a 1v1 situation, Hattori against Ada, and I believe this is our last match. And talking a little bit about mind games, one of the things is that Hattori just lost the last match pretty convincingly. So at this point, I'd like to think that I have a little bit of a mental advantage. There's basically, Hattori has to recover from the loss, and so chances are, in my head while playing this, I'm thinking, she's probably a little bit angrier, she might be a little bit frustrated, and hopefully that means that I can capitalize on some mistakes. What's interesting about this, there was a good example of using a signature move to punish an approach, because Ada's signature move with pistols has kind of a backwards attack on it. I was able to dodge out of the advance and hit Hattori with the last attack. So that technique right there, where I throw my spear straight up in the air, that's something that I end up doing pretty often, because it kind of prevents that whole vertical area from being stood in, because otherwise you're going to get hit by the spear, or you're going to have to dodge through it. Now, it was a little scary because it was without a weapon for a little while, but I was able to pick one up. And in this case, the reason why I tossed away my pistols here was essentially because I don't like using pistols against swords, because swords get in too close where pistols aren't very helpful, but the spear tends to have better reach. So in this scenario, like, because I got away with my pistol, Hattori was able to punish my spear throw later. Now she's edge guarding, and there's an unarmed move, getting in some extra damage, because basically at that point I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to knock her out, but if I could get a few extra hits of damage in, that's going to be useful, because it's closing that advantage. At this point, with Ada at white health and Hattori at yellow, the way I would think about this is that Ada is in the lead, because Hattori is going to have to do substantially more damage to Ada before a knockout will occur. One of the other slightly unknown things that's useful to you if you don't want to be looking at the top menu or the top right corner to see health, whenever you connect with a character, you'll see that they glow a color, and they're actually glowing the color of their health. So look at this the next time I get... So Hattori just got hit, and if you see when she did, she flashed red. So concentrate on Hattori again. The next time she gets hit, because she's at white health, the flash will be white. If she hits me, my flash will be yellow. And this is basically one of the quick visual indicators of what someone's health is at. So you can see right there that Hattori flashed white when she got hit, and yellow there, yellow again. And I mean, this is something that's not very... you know, obviously this little bit of information isn't going to make you a better player, but it is useful to know because you can avoid taking your eyes off of the main screen and instead just look at the flash of the character. So yeah, I know we talked about a lot of stuff in this video, and there has been a lot going on with the 1v1 matches itself while in here. Playing pogo sticks with a downlight is very fun. But, you know, one of the other things, if you really want to improve at 1v1 matches, is, you know, just find good people to play with and partner with. You know, try to find people who are around your skill level. One of the people that I play with constantly is Misfit, and the reason that we do play constantly is because we win and lose against each other about 50% of the time. And that win-loss ratio has stayed pretty steady throughout, because we're constantly improving at a similar rate of speed. And that's something that is really good. When you can find somebody where that's kind of your win-loss ratio is about 50%, that's when you know you found a good partner to play with, because they're going to constantly be challenging you, but not to the point where they're so far past your skill level that you can't learn anything. So if you are looking for somebody to spar with, that's kind of what you want to look for, is someone that you win/lose against half of the time. The other thing that is useful for leveling up your game in 1v1 in any kind of competitive game is, in addition to having a good sparring partner for learning, find somebody who's ridiculously better than you and play them. Like, don't play them all night, don't play them to the point of frustration, but play, you know, like 5 to 10 matches with them, and then think about what they're doing differently that you're not. Try to think about why you're losing, what techniques they're using, and how they're playing that is causing you to lose to them constantly. Because, you know, you only learn from people who are as strong or stronger than you are. So having a mixture of both is pretty helpful. One of the other things that I'd recommend for learning, and this is kind of how I've improved at this game so quickly, is learn a little bit about everyone's play style that you play against and steal. Like, so some of the main people that I've played against, Ash is one, for example, and one of the videos that I covered with him, I talked constantly about his ability to throw things at people's faces. Like, to me, that was like his big standout quality, was he was just amazing at being able to throw things and hit people with it. And so as soon as I realized that, I started trying to implement it into my game. And now, I don't think I'm quite as good as he is, but I'm pretty close. And it's a technique that I've started to use constantly. Misfit is like basically known in my mind for being someone who dodges constantly and is very defensive. He basically he goes for an attack, will hit you once or twice, and then retreat. He's constantly trying to attack safely and approaches very cautiously, and basically tries to force you out of position before he does anything. And so to beat him, I basically had to learn to adapt my style and steal that from him. You know, I learned to punish his dodges, I learned to punish his approaches, and now when I play against other people, I'm very defensive, and it's largely because of what I've stolen from him. Another person that I've played with, both Altane and Fly, are both very good at heavier attacks. at kind of knowing just the right amount of time to charge things for edge guards and for recovery times and to punish dodges. And it's still something I'm working on, but it is something I'm trying to add into my game because I'm not as good at using heavy attacks, but I'm seeing people are using them effectively in 1v1s, and that makes me it makes me want to put that in my arsenal. So again, my advice just is steal techniques from everyone you play with, learn from everyone. If you see something that someone's doing that is great, try to emulate it, try to add it to your game. And if you see something that people are doing wrong, try to avoid it. So yeah, that pretty much covers it for this video. If you are interested in seeing more detailed information and descriptions on each section, something that's a little bit more scripted with maybe video examples, if that's something you really want to see, please let me know in the comments, because I'm willing to do that if people are very interested in it. But in the meantime, I hope that this discussion has been helpful for you and for improving your Brawlhalla game and 1v1 competitive matches. If you ever want to get any matches in with me, just let me know. I'm happy to play with any viewers and subscribers. If you like this video, please hit the like button as it helps out a great deal. Leave me any comments and suggestions you have in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to see more. Shameless self-promotion. And I'll see you next time for some more Brawlhalla.